You're welcome to call me Jeremy. So, Jeremy, here's what I want to ask. I want to ask for you to start by actively picturing a time in which you were studying. Like even really try to visually picture it. What room were you in? What were you physically doing? And I will tell you, the reason I'm doing this is an old teacher trick. It's called, in fancy teacher jargon, activating your schema. What that really means is activating prior knowledge. And the idea is that if you do that, the more you actively picture, like, what did it look like this moment of me studying? It becomes easier to then draw more connections from all the stuff we talk about to see, oh, here's how this stuff we're talking about is useful, how it connects to the times I really studied, so that then there's more connections like 2 weeks from now, 4 weeks from now, a little more of this stuff you can remember, and it's not get lost after. So I really do want to ask you to actively picture a time in which you were studying, and then to take either a couple notes, whether it's in a Word doc or if you have a piece of paper and pencil handy, of just what's the stuff you've tried, what's a couple things that you found really worked well, or what's something that didn't work that you'd like want to warn someone else about. I tried this and it really messed me up. So it's 12:02. I'm going to give us a quick minute. It's like 12:03. I do want to ask you to actively pick or take a couple notes, whether it's in a Word doc or a piece of paper. Here's kind of the game plan for today. So we're going to talk really about 1, 2, 3 things. First is, what can I be doing after each class to pull as much of that information that I'm learning that hour and into my memory? So I'm spending an hour in class. What can I be doing in that same day that I'm in class? So that hour I'm in class is as most useful for me as possible. I'm pulling out as much of that information into my long-term memory. And then here we're going to talk about, what can I do for each class? And then what's something I can do once a week? So I'm taking all that stuff from those classes and pulling it from short-term or active memory way back into long-term memory. So by the time I get here, I'm not having to cram. I'm not having to try to overstuff my memory with all of these, late nights and over long study sessions. So just as a quick side note, part of what happens with cramming, or especially those all-nighters, is the short-term memory. It's by nature. It has a limited capacity, whereas long-term memory is huge. And so what I'm doing each week is trying to do some strategies that we'll talk about. So I'm moving this stuff into long-term memory where I have way more storage capacity, so that at this last week right before the test, all I'm doing is trying to essentially touch the material a little bit to bring it back into my shorter-term memory. So with that said, we're going to talk about what to do in class, what to do once a week. I did this on Saturday. You can pick any day. I just wanted to visually make sense. And then what to do, some tools for what to do the week before the test. I want to start, though, with some study strategies that don't so much work. And for what it's worth, at the Academic Support Center, we have really gone through the research and looked at kind of study after study. Okay, what's the pattern here? What do all of these scientific studies show are really common things people do that don't so much work, or that trip people up, or that what are some of those common study strategies that people put a lot of time into, but then don't get as much out of? And so here's the first one, and this is the one that for sure hurts my feelings, because this is 100% what I did when I was in college. So here's what I mean by rereading as a study strategy and why it doesn't so much work. So when I was in college studying for a test, I'd be reading a textbook and I'd read something that was like, oh, that looks important. And so I'd underline it. I'd read it maybe a second time, read it maybe like a third time for safety, and then close the book and be like, great study, did a good job. Here's the two things I was doing wrong. First, whenever I'm just rereading, I'm making this really weak connection to the material, because in a way, I'm just looking at it. I'm not moving it. I'm not manipulating it. I'm not doing something with it with my brain. I'm almost just looking at information. And in the brain, it's kind of this like Darwinian survival of the fittest, that only the strongest connections survive. And so if I have this really weak connection here, I'm building a connection that's just a whole lot less likely to last over the course of weeks like that. The second worst thing I'm doing when I'm rereading is I'm, in a sense, just really effectively tricking myself and thinking I'm learning. Because here's what that might look like. So when I go to sleep at night, my brain might go, okay, you looked at this thing on a page 3 times, probably that's enough times to look at a thing. Like you're really familiar with it. You looked at it 3 times, that's a lot of times to look at a thing, so let's get rid of it. You've looked at that enough. And so in this really kind of hard irony, the thing I was trying to study, the thing I was trying to learn, might be the first thing my brain disappears that night because it's like, okay, you're really familiar with this piece of information. You looked at it a lot of times. Let's get there. Which I think kind of dovetails and connects to second study strategy that does not so much work, which is sticking to exactly one study strategy or learning style. So here's what that might look like. And I want to say I saw a lot of Quizlets and note cards as study guides that you all were saying this works for me, and I'm not knocking them at all. What sticking to exactly one study strategy might look like, though, is making one set of note cards and only using that set of note cards, or making one Quizlet and only using that one Quizlet to study. Here again are the two dangers that can happen. First is especially with note cards, if I'm making one connection to the material, like, okay, here's what's on this side of the note card, here's what's on the other, I'm making this connection of what's on here to what's on here. If that connection in the real day of a test, when there's the pressure and the stress, if that connection fails, I'm out of luck. So we'll look at a few different ways to build more connections, multiple connections to a piece of material, so that if one fails, it's okay. I got a couple backups as backups. The other thing that can happen if I'm making one connection over and over is I might be making this one connection to the material, and that might be just not the thing that's on the test. The other thing that can go wrong here that I want to be kind of careful with how I talk about is when I'm using one study strategy, what might be happening is that I'm no longer so much learning the material as I am getting more familiar with it. So here's how I want to pitch it. Again, just a quick thumbs up if you ever had this experience, very human experience, where you're like at a party, you see someone, you know their name, but you can't remember it, and you're in your brain like, wait, what was that person's name? Like, I can picture him. He had a goatee, a leather jacket, was talking about cryptocurrency. What did he say his name was? Just a quick thumbs up if you've ever had this very human experience. Yeah. Okay. That feeling, what you're feeling in that moment, is the brain actively trying to build a connection. And that feeling, almost like a muscle tensing, that's the feeling we want as much as possible when studying, because that's your brain actually building those strong connections, trying to connect two knots together. And so as what might be happening with note cards, or when I'm getting really familiar with my study strategy, is it might be that like I'm looking at one side of the note card and just going like, oh, I know exactly what's on the other side of it, but I'm no longer learning. I'm just getting more and more familiar with what I have on this one side. And so all of that to say, if you ever find this where your study strategy is getting really familiar, like it feels like you're getting really good at it, right? Like, oh, I know exactly what's on all these note cards. I'm doing great. That's a moment actually that is sort of a red warning light moment of now the name of the game is how can you make this less familiar? How can you make this harder? How can you build that resistance so you have more of that sense of tension of actively trying to make a connection whenever things start feeling familiar? So some ways you could do that with note cards, for example, is to add more to the other side of the note card. So now there's more connections here, and also it's a little harder to remember because there's more material. Or you could, better yet, put all the note cards away and make totally new note cards with totally different things. Or better yet, do something different than note cards. Like let's say take out a piece of paper and see, can you write down what is on all of your note cards almost in an outline, any of those things that make it in some way, how can I make this less familiar, more unknown, more difficult, more like that tensing of a muscle, trying to remember someone's name. All right, last of the study strategies I want to talk about that don't so much work. So I in my heart of hearts, kind of feel like all of us think we're the exception to this rule, where it's like, no, I can totally be learning stuff from this textbook and also watching a movie, and I'm kind of listening to a podcast, and I'm driving down the road at 60 miles an hour. But what I can tell you is that just study after study shows that for everyone, what happens with multitasking is we're essentially dividing our focus. And so again, with that divided focus where I'm on a couple different things, I'm building weaker connections to the thing I'm trying to study. And I'm building those kinds of connections that in the Darwinian survival of the fittest brain are less likely to last or are less likely to be as strong and as deep. And so when multitasking, I'm essentially just putting off the work of studying, of building those deeper connections for my future self to do. So by trying to save time now, by doing more things at once, I'm actually kind of pushing that back to have to do that kind of that work later on. All right, so let's look at a couple of study strategies that work. First is it's called recall recite, but here's my pitch for it, which is as soon as you get out of class, this invisible stopwatch goes off, and it's a forgetting clock. And studies have shown that that clock has about 24 hours on it. And after that 24 hours is up, anything that you have forgotten is gone. And it is like irretrievably gone to the point you have to relearn it completely. I can tell you, I don't take tests anymore. I'm not in class, but I still find this when I take notes for a meeting, where if I don't come back to the material in some way, especially after that 24 hours, it is so easy to the next day look at my notes and be like, wait, what does this mean? Like, it is, I think, shocking how quickly our own notes can become just nonsense to ourselves. So this strategy is really about avoiding that and getting that forgetting clock. And here's one way to do it, and I'll talk about other ways to do it. So this is how I took notes in college. And the idea is over here on the right-hand side, this is all the stuff that's going on in class that I'm just trying to keep track of as the course instructor is talking. And then inside that 24 hours, ideally right after class, I'm just writing in the left-hand margin some summary of like, here's basically what's going on over here. Here's basically what's going on over here. Here's basically what's going on over here. By doing that, by touching the material again, writing that fast summary, I'm doing a really fast reprocessing of what's over here. And I'm almost like double knotting the connection so that I can go back and look at these notes and have them make sense and beat that forgetting clock. It's a little like if you've ever written down a dream or heard that people do this. When you write down a dream, you can remember it. Way later, it's almost like you can access that dream still. This is kind of the same idea. By doing this fast summary inside that 24 hours, ideally right after class, I'm able to re-access that stuff that the course instructor was talking about so that it's not as lost, and a lot more of that I can pull back into my brain. So that's the recall part. Here's the recite, which is the other reason that I would set up my notes like this in college is if you do this, your notes automatically become flashcards, where now I can put my hand over the right side and be like, okay, recall, wait, what was over here? What did they talk about in class? Even like what literally do I think is underneath my hand in this moment? And by doing that active recall, just like trying to remember someone's name at a party, I'm again strengthening the connection. I'm building almost like two connections to this thing that was just talked about in class, and it's way more easy for me to remember a whole lot more from the class and I'm starting even to pull that information into my short-term, into my active memory. I can tell you for what it's worth, if this is the one thing that you take away from today's presentation, of sometimes in that 24 hours after a class, writing down a quick summary, whether it's, you could write a quick summary at the left-hand side, like in these notes. You could do it at the very end, like here's all the stuff we talked about. You could even, I know there are, I've worked with students who they'll print out the slides to a PowerPoint, and then they'll write on the back of each PowerPoint page, here's what was talked about on the other side of this page. But if you do these two things, writing down a summary of here's the stuff we talked about, and doing that really fast self-quizzing, almost like note cards, trying to actively remember, wait, what was talked about here? What was this picture? Studies have shown that when we don't do that, we tend to lose about 50% of the information. And so if you do, you're getting about twice as much out of each class, and it is literally for each class. All right, so here's what I've done so far. I've taken a quick summary so that I'm not forgetting, I'm beating that forgetting clock. I've done an active lead picture, active recall, so that I'm starting to move that piece of information, all this piece of information on my notes into my short-term memory. What this now study strategy is about is moving beyond memory into actually kind of knowing something. So one of my pitches for this is that I can tell you that I took 4 years of German in high school and another 4 years of German in college, and I cannot speak a lick of German to you now. Have you ever had this experience? Was it a foreign language class? Was it a science class? If you've ever had this class where you're like, I know I learned this stuff, and now somehow it's all gone. So here's 2 ways to kind of cut against that. And if I'd done this, I might be able to speak German to you now after 8 years of studying it. Really what both these strategies are about, these reflection strategies, are about taking the thing that I'm trying to memorize and now connecting it to other trees of thought in my brain. And here's 2 ways to do that, to take the thing I'm memorizing and connect it to other trees of thought in my brain where they really stick and where I've kind of processed it with the other stuff that I know. So first, in fancy teacher jargon, This is called elaborative interrogation, but what that really means is just asking questions, almost like playing detective in any detective movie that you've seen where they shine some bright lights on a suspect and ask some hard questions. You can do that same kind of thing with any of those concepts I'm working from class. So an example to make this a little more concrete, I'm like 90% sure that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. Really don't quote me on that. I'm just pretty sure I remember that from like a science class somewhere along the line, that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. But the truth is, I don't really know what that means. And so if I wanted to put that idea, mitochondria, powerhouse of the cell, through this elaborative interrogation, put some bright lights in a detective room on it, here's what I might ask. Why? Like, why are you the powerhouse of the cell? What does that mean? What does it actually mean to be a powerhouse in the cell? Or like, what happened to make you the powerhouse of the cell? Was there a process? How does being the powerhouse of the cell connect to the other parts of the cell? Like, what's the relationship there? If I had done some of that, this active reflection, active elaborative interrogation, asking some questions, I might now be able to actually explain, if I had done that way back when, I might now be able to explain, why, what the powerhouse of the cell really means, instead of just having kind of what probably is like a schoolhouse rock there in the, buried in my brain somewhere. Again, I'm going to send this PDF in the chat at the very end. But what I do want you to know for now is all of these questions are very specifically designed to do this. So here's what some of them might look like. What is important about or significant about this idea? So I'm learning about the mitochondria. Why? Like, why is the professor having this be a part of the classroom? What makes this piece of information important for me to know? Or even like, how could I use this? Like, how do I picture myself using this piece of information, whether that is in my career, in another class? Where else am I going to see this? You could even do something like this. So I've just learned this piece of information about the mitochondria. What did I have to actually learn first, though, in order for this piece of information to make sense? Or I can go in the other direction. I just learned about this mitochondria. What do I think I might learn next? I think someone in the chat at the very beginning was like, I like to look at my notes before class to kind of almost preview them, get them back in my brain. Yeah, you could do that. I've just learned this thing. What do I start picturing that I might learn in the next class? Second reflection strategy. So first, playing detective, asking those tough questions of the concept. Second is to either actually or imaginarily teach something to someone else. So what that might look like is if you have a friend, a family member, a roommate, or if you wanted to with any of our peer tutors, to literally sit down and be like, I want to just teach this thing out as best I can. You could even also just do this imaginarily, like to walk around after class, on the way to the dorms, or just around the beautiful Aurora, to actively think, wait, how would I explain this to someone else? I can tell you, if you do this one trick of trying to actually or imaginarily teach something to someone else has been shown to be one of the best study strategies for two reasons. Hey, someone asked me study strategy for finals, this might be it. By doing this, two things happen. First is that as you're imagining to a friend or to someone teaching this, okay, here's what you'd have to know in order for this to make sense, here's how this part works, you will find all of these interesting descriptions, metaphors, examples, ways of talking about it, ways of describing it. They're all specifically custom fitted to how you learn and understand things. The second thing that will happen if you try this out, try to actually to a person in a social connection or just in a daydream walking around to try to teach something out. You should teach it and be like, oh, and this is how this works, and this is how this works, and this is how this works. And then, I don't know, you will find this place where you can't go anymore because you don't know that part. So by doing this, it just really naturally shows you what are the blank places, what are the things that are still murky, where do you have to strategically go back to the textbook and course notes, where are the places that will be most useful for you to touch base back. So this last one, the way I often pitch it is that it is going to feel like adding extra steps, but what it's really doing is adding extra processing. That, for what it's worth, is true of a lot of study strategies, that they can feel like I'm adding extra steps that I have to do, but each of those extra steps is often ways of reprocessing information. So especially if I've done that summarizing, that active recall, like with note cards, Quizlet, or doing it with my notes, doing that reflection strategy to take what I'm memorizing and actively connect it to other trees of thought in my brain. Now here's some ways to reprocess the information so I'm getting even more connections for that data test. Here's one of them might look like literally writing a summary of the summaries. For what it's worth, my friends who were in law school swore by this method. They would write a summary of the day, and then at the end of the week, a summary of the summaries, and then a summary of the summaries of the summaries, and a summary of the summaries of the summaries of the summaries. And the reason they would do that is they were lawyers studying for the bar, and they had to get a lot of information really pulled back into their brain, and this extra steps of re-summarizing stuff, did that work. Another way to do this is to see if you can take something that's in a written format and turn it into visual or vice versa. So that might look like is taking the Quizlet you built or the flashcards and seeing, is there a way for me to actually organize this information like visually, like in a map or a picture or a diagram that makes some sense to me? You could go the other way of taking a real diagram, real chart from the textbook and seeing, can you write down in language what this means and what it's saying? Or even just, can you look at a diagram, close the book, and redo that diagram as best you can from that? These are all some, whether it's rewriting, taking even 1 minute of here's literally everything I can think of on this process, or going back and forth between visuals and language. And this rewriting, reorganizing is essentially saying, how can I find some way to reprocess this information in a way I haven't done yet? What I want to talk now about are some strategies for not just how to study, but when to study. So here's the first two. Distributed practice. You don't have to remember what any of these fancy jargony terms mean. Actually, no, let me start here. Interleaving. Again, don't need to remember what this means, but here's what it looks like. I sometimes joke that interleaving is like multitasking's older, cooler brother. So whereas multitasking, I have my focus divided between a few things all at the same time. What interleaving is I have my focus on one thing for about an hour, and then I shift my focus to something else for about an hour, and then I shift it back. To make that a little more concrete, what that might look like is I spend an hour studying for one class, and then another hour like reading for a different class, or doing homework for a different class, or even just, again, walking around, taking in some of the autumn air and beauty that I'm sure is soon upon us, and then going back to studying that first class. You could even, in that hour shift, I've had students who swear by they really like to do something a little more hands-on. They'll be like, in that hour shift, part of what I want to do, what they find most helpful, is to do something like organize a room, organize some papers, write a to-do list, do something that's almost helping out a different aspect of their life for about an hour. For what it's worth, that hour time might vary for you. Like your mileage may vary. Studies tend to say it averages around an hour. But the more important thing is typically around an hour is when people hit a point of diminishing returns. What that means is after about an hour, typically, you can be putting in the same amount of work, but just getting less back from the same amount of work because the brain's getting tired of focusing on this thing that it's been focusing on for an hour. Whereas if I focus for an hour, do something else, and then come back, it's almost like my brain resets and I don't get that point of diminishing returns. Again, your mileage may vary. So my big pitch to you would be anytime that you're feeling like you're putting in the same amount of work, but getting back less, it's because you probably are. And that might be a time to shift focus to something else. The one thing that can trip this up is I have to have a focus here, and focus here. I can't go from focus to something really passive and fun and relaxing, or something, with a distracted focus. So if I go focus, study, watch Stranger Things, I'm never going to go back. Or if I go focus, study, cruise social media, now I'm putting more stuff in my brain and get distracted. It's harder for me to go back here. Which is like a single focus, then I can distributed practice. So here's what distributed practice, what this looks like, what it means. Again, I want to ask you just if you've ever had a really classically styled class experience that goes like this. You talk about something in class, you have homework on that thing, about a week or so later, you get a quiz on that thing, and then 2 to 3 weeks or so later, you get a test. Give me just a quick thumbs up if you've ever had that 1, 2, 3 experience in class. So for what it's worth, the reason teachers do that, the reason it's a really classic model, It's not because teachers are trying to give more work or like pad the grade book. The reason they do that is because that's how moving something from active to long-term memory works. What's happening in the brain is on day one, I look at it and then I touch the material again and my brain goes, okay, I saw it in class, I saw it again in the homework or in my study strategy. So I'm not going to get rid of it. I'm going to hold on to it because you proved to me it's worth keeping it for at least a little bit. And then about a week later, if I touch the material again, and it is typically about a week later, then my brain goes, okay, wait. We kept this in active memory. We had to use it again. Let's for sure not get rid of this. Let's hold on to it for at least a while. And then if 2 to 3 weeks later, I touch the material again, that's when the brain goes, okay, you showed me this 3 times. I had to use this 3 times. That's it. Let's move it to long-term memory because it looks like we're going to have to actually know this thing. I'm going to scroll down for a quick minute. That is really in part the name of the game for the study strategies over here. Where once a week, I'm trying to touch both the material of that week and the material of the previous weeks so that I'm starting to move all of the semester into long-term memory. That said, I want to show you one more quick visual. Highlight just a couple things. First is this. Maybe no one's ever told you this before, but course instructors are told at Aurora University, and this is pretty common throughout the university system, that for every 1 hour you're in class, they're asked to give you about what they think is 2 to 3 hours of independent work. And so what that might look like, something like this. I say this in part that if you ever have a class that's feeling like it's just an easier class, I'm not having to do a whole lot of homework, what might be happening is that the course instructor is giving you less homework here because they're expecting more of that 2 to 3 hours of work outside to be spent right here. And again, I'm spending some time studying the stuff we just looked at, sometimes studying the stuff that's been going on the week before and the week before that. The last 2 pro tip moves, again, I have right at the end of class, 5 to 10 minutes where I'm touching that material, doing that initial studying. Now it's almost like class just got 5 minutes longer and I'm more likely to do it because it's just a part of the class. Again, last pro tip, right at the beginning of class, kind of like we did at the beginning. I activate my schema, look back to my notes, spend a quick minute going back over to the course book, try to picture, wait, what did we talk about? Now I'm making it so it's easier for me to build connections throughout this whole class period. Again, by just adding essentially 5 minutes here and 5 minutes here, I'm making this a whole lot useful. You can do that for what it's worth, that activating schema thing, also textbooks of like opening it up and being like, wait, before I start, what is the course instructor talking about or talk about this? Or even based on these headings, what's other things I know about just what these headings are telling me so far? So one of those study sessions, one of those reviews, here's what might go on, what it might look like inside one of those, where I'm doing all those different strategies we talked about. I'm doing some kind of self-quizzing, maybe writing another summary to build those sectors, double knotted connections to pull this into memory. Maybe even taking a break, walking around, or doing this on paper, or actively just daydreaming. Some of those reflection strategies, that's elaborative interrogation, or trying to actively, imaginarily teach something to someone else. And then I'm trying to find what are some ways I can reorganize, rewrite, reprocess this information so it's going back through my brain again, and I end up with just a whole lot more connections to this material that lasts longer in that very brutal Darwinian survival of the fittest brain. This is maybe the most important part of a study session, of a 1 hour study session, which is to take a break. And to literally not put anything else in your brain. So to not put in television, social media, but to really let the brain start to unwind. What we're trying to do here is to essentially let forgetting start to happen. So I just did all this work. Now I give myself 10 minutes where I'm not putting new stuff in. I'm literally letting my brain decompress so it starts to forget. And then I touch the material again. So I start to forget it, and then I come back and look at it again, and now I'm again kind of double reconnecting that material from having forgotten it a little bit. Yeah. So I'm going to jump in with 2 lists. We're really right here now. We have what to do during class, a little that summarizing, active recall, reflection strategies to start building those connections. What am I doing each week to move this stuff into long-term memory? Now, let's just look at a couple tools for what to do like the week before class. sorry, the week before finals or a test or midterms, you get the idea. So again, I want to ask, ever have this in this experience where you had a test, but the course instructor or the teacher just didn't give you a study guide? So what I want you to have here is one tool for building your own study guide if this ever happens, where you're in a class and you're not given a study guide, you have to build your own. First part over here is literally just a list of here's the topics I think I might be tested on, and you could get that from going back to the chapter headings, the big bolded stuff in a textbook, and just writing those down here. You could look back through the PowerPoints. What are the titles? What are the bolded things? What are the definitions? So I'm getting this list. You could even, again, if you've written those summaries alongside your notes, look at the summaries and be like, oh, probably those things will be some of the stuff I'm tested on. But in any case, right here, however it makes the most sense to you for your class, here are the basic things I think I'm going to be tested on. Here's the more important, more cool part. This is again, I don't care if you remember any of these names, but this is called Bloom's taxonomy. And most of your course instructors that probably have something like this in the back of their brain, and now you have it too. What it is this is a model of thinking about what it means to actually process information to the point of fully knowing it. So if I, let's say, had mitochondria is on my things I might be tested on, I can move that into these fill in the blank questions. So I have from my topics, here's a whole lot of fill in the blank questions that really naturally move me through this progression of learning something. So like remembering, what is the mitochondria? How would you classify the mitochondria? What would be the result if you removed the mitochondria from the cell? For what it's worth, a last quick thing, especially in nursing, a lot of test questions end up over here, where it's like, based on these symptoms, what do you have to do? What should you do first? To answer that question, you have to know what those symptoms mean. You have to be able to remember them. You have to understand how those symptoms connect and show a bigger picture. And you have to be able to apply, here's what you should do based on these two things. A lot of course instructors, they have this in the back of their brain, and also will try to ask questions over here, or maybe even upwards over here. So now you have this way too of building a really thorough study guide for moving that information into higher levels of understanding. The second week before the exam tool I want you to see. So really what this is for is, I can tell you there were times when I was studying where I would almost feel like this sense of overwhelm, where it'd be like, wait, how am I going to learn? Like I have to learn all of this stuff all at once, or I have to study like the whole textbook or all of the course, and I get this into like, I can't, like it feels impossible, it feels too big. So here's one way to break it down and to set up that week of study. This section A, B, C, D, you can break this up however it makes the most sense to you. But what I'm trying to do is chunk what I'm going to study into like 4 different chunks. So maybe it's like chapters 1 through 3, chapters 4 through 6, yada, yada, yada. Or maybe it's like I'm going to look just at the stuff from weeks 1 and 2, weeks 3 and 4, 5 and 6, or I'm just going to look at, this part of my study guide from up here, and then this part, and then this part. However, it makes the most sense to divide it into these different chunks, more or less equal, 1, 2, 3, 4. Here's the next thing you can do with them. Then once you said, here's the big chunks of information that I want to be studying, that I want to be pulling into my brain. So what this looks like is that on day 1, I'm only looking at that chunk 1 piece of information. That's all. I'm not worrying about the rest. On day 2, now I'm starting to look at chunk 2. I spend just a little bit of time looking back at chunk A. Day 3, chunk 3, a little bit of chunk 2, all the way through. So that by day 5, I haven't totally forgotten. I haven't lost track of this stuff I was looking at the beginning. I've touched it a little bit each day. I also wasn't having to try to learn all of 5 days of this stuff all at once at the same time. So it's one way of just organizing that study. It's something that can feel a little less like a sense of overwhelm and a little easier to take on piece by piece. I want to ask you to try this out. So you've now written down a couple things that you're picturing yourself doing with these study strategies. You've even seen, I hope, in the chat some ways other folks are picturing this. What I want to ask you is to come up with like this is a classic goal. Best goal of here's what I feel my best week of studying is going to look like. Like, how do you picture? What kind of stuff are you going to be doing? Are you going to be doing, that 1 hour interleaving? Are you picturing doing a little bit of like, how are you picturing your best day, your best week of studying? And then I also want to ask you to come up with like a least effort plan for the weeks where literally everything goes wrong, nothing's worked. I feel sick. My friend said something hurtful to me. I'm going to give you an example outside of studying for like what this best goal and least effort goal looks like. So in a different summer, when I had different needs, I had a goal to run every day. Best goal, half an hour every day. Least effort goal, I'm literally, if everything's gone wrong, I would say all I have to do to meet my least effort goal is put on running clothes and go outside. And that's it. And sometimes I would do it. I'd go outside, put on my running clothes, go outside and say, okay, well done. Now I'm going back in. I don't want to do it. More often than not, you put on the running clothes, you go outside and it's like, okay, I'm out here. I'll go around the block. And then you go around the block. It's like, okay, I'm actually feeling a little better now that I've started running. I can go a little further. What I'm asking you really is, what's the best kind of studying thing? What are you picturing as your best goal for a really good week of studying? How are you seeing that? And then also, what's literally the lowest hurdle that you're willing to jump over, but to jump over it every single week when everything goes wrong? I'm just going to connect to one question, and you'd asked number one study tip for finals. Here's we've talked through kind of a whole bunch of them. Those last couple would be really great, especially I know a lot of students talk about chunking, using that exact model. For some reason, just takes for them a lot of stress off really fast and makes them feel like, wait, I can do this. That's probably one of the best for finals study strategies I'd recommend. One of the best for learning study strategies I might recommend is that teaching to someone else, whether it's doing it in your head, imaginarily, like in a daydream, and really picturing another person, or actually doing it to someone that you trust to hear yourself out. Again, thank you all so much. I'll be wishing you all a whole lot of luck in the semester, and I think these beginning weeks are sometimes jam-packed full of information and stuff to do, and I'll be wishing you all well and navigating those too. Thank you.